Ashtotarashata Shri Srimad. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai, Nitai Gaura Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Nayanam Namaskritya Naranchaiva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nasupraya Shurabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. So we continue our discussion on the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, Text 2, Vidura's talks with Maitreya. Vidura Uvacha Sukaya Karmani Karoti Loko Natai Sukam Vanyar Uparamava Vidhet Bhuyastata Eva Tukam Yatatra Yuktam Bhagavan Vadena Vidura Uvacha Sukaya Karmani Karoti Loko Natai Sukam Vanyaruparamava Videta Bhuyastata Eva Tukam Yadatra Yuktam Bhagavan Videna Vidura Uvacha Sukaya Karmani Karoti Loko Nathai Sukham Vanyaruparamava Vidheta Bhuya Sata Eva Dukam Yadatra Yuktam Bhagavan Videna vacha kaya karmani karoti loko Deya bhuyastatam heva dukam Natra bhaktam bhagavan vedena Vaishnavis Vacha Mani lokti loko Daya sukam vanina bhavarambamba Veda bhuyastata eva dukam Yadhatra yuktam bhagavad vedena Dura uvacha Sukaya karmani karoti loko Nathai sukham vanya uparavamba Edheta bhuyas hatha eva dukam Yatatra yuktam bhagavan vedena Vidura uvacha Mani karmani karoti loko Vidura uvacha Vidura said, Sukhaya, for attaining happiness, karmani, fruitive activities, karoti, everyone does so, lokaha, in this world, na, never, die, by those activities, sukham, any happiness, va, or, anyat, differently, uparama, satiation, va, either, vedeta, achieves, bhuyaha, on the contrary, tatha, by such activities, eva, certainly, dukam, miseries, yat, that which, atra, under the circumstances, yuktam, right course, bhagavan, O great one, videt, may kindly enlighten, naha, us. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Vidura said, O great sage, everyone in this world engages in fruitive activities to attain happiness, but one finds neither satiation nor the mitigation of distress. On the contrary, one is only aggravated by such activities. Please, therefore, give us directions on how one should live for real happiness. Purport. Vidura asked Maitreya some common questions, which was not originally his intention. Uddhava asked Vidura to approach Maitreya Muni and inquire into all the truths concerning the Lord, His name, fame, quality, form, pastimes, entourage, etc. And thus, when Vidura approached Maitreya, he should have asked only about the Lord. But out of natural humility, he did not immediately ask about the Lord, but inquired into a subject which would be of great importance to the common man. A common man cannot understand the Lord. He must first know the real position of his life under the influence of the illusory energy. In illusion, one thinks that he can be happy only by fruitive activities. But what actually happens is that one becomes more and more entangled in the network of action and reaction and does not find any solution to the problem of life. There is a nice song in this connection. Because of a great desire to have all happiness in life, I built this house. But unfortunately, the whole scheme has turned to ashes because the house was unexpectedly set on fire. The law of nature is like that. Everyone tries to become happy by planning in the material world, but the law of nature is so cruel that it sets fire to one's schemes. The fruitive worker is not happy in his schemes, nor is there any cessation of his continuous hankering for happiness. Vidura uvacha sukaya karmani karoti loko natai sukam vanyaruparamava vedeta bhuyastata eva dukam yaratra yuktam bhagavan vedena. Om agyanatimirandasya gananjana shalakoya chakshurun minitam yena tasmai shri gurave namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swam Padantikam Vancha Kalpatarumbhischa Kripa Sindhuvra Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Namaste Manoapi Sachiputra Mata Surupam Shirubam Tasya Grajam Uruparim Matarim Gosvaratam Radha Kundam Girivaram Mahorarika Maramam Samprapto Yasya Patita Kripaya Shri Gurum Tam Natosmi Anadana Srinam Dante Ridam Yache Panapana Shri Manupa Paramojo Toli Samjamajamani Bhagi Shri Yashya Varane Lakshmi Yashya Chavakshashi Yashya Ste Hridayi Sambit Tam Nisham Hamahamaje. In Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Chaitanya Shikshamrita, he describes, or rather Jaiva Dharma, he describes that there's different developments of consciousness that the living entity goes through. And according to how much the living entity's consciousness has been expanded, according to the form of life they're existing in, to that degree one is able to make inquiry into the nature of the self. So the first type of body that one can take is known as covered, and a covered consciousness is like that of a plant. Plant's consciousness is completely covered over. It has no ability to make inquiry practically at all. The only thing that it's able to do is ask about food. It's on the platform of consciousness which is known as Annamaya. It's simply interested in maintaining its existence, more or less. And it's not able to inquire into anything beyond photosynthesis, more or less. It's simply interested in taking in sunlight and maintaining itself. Beyond that is withdrawn consciousness, which is the consciousness of animals. So animals, they're able to inquire where is food, where is mate, where is shelter, and their consciousness is a little bit more developed because their inquiry is a bit more refined. They're able to think of things which are beyond themselves. And we even see sometimes animals, their children will be put into distress. And with their children being put in distress, there's a sense of an extension of oneself beyond just one's physical body. One feels a sense of affection for its offspring. And so it's able to extend itself and make sacrifices for the purpose of its offsprings. So its consciousness is a bit more developed. Beyond that is the budding consciousness, which is when someone takes the life of a human being, they come into the platform of budding consciousness. Budding consciousness is known as this because the human form of life is characterized by responsibility. One has the ability to either go up or go down. Just like a budding plant. If it's nourished properly, it can become blossomed. So it's the duty of the human being to develop the consciousness in such a way that the consciousness begins to blossom. And that's really what the process of Krishna consciousness is. Most people, when they get to the human form of life, there's 3 planes of existence which one can exist on. There's a plane of exploitation, which is what's being discussed here by Vidura. There's the plane of renunciation, and there's the plane of dedication or devotion. And the plane of dedication and devotion is the natural inclination of the living entity, because whether one is existing in an animal form of life, whether one is existing in a plant form of life, the disposition for service is always present. But the human form of life is a chance to mature that disposition of service and direct it towards its proper object of service. So on the plane of exploitation, life is characterized by how can one living entity is food for another, simply trying to exploit other living entities for one's own maintenance. And we find in the Srimad Bhagavatam in the 11th canto, the Hamsa Avatar, is discussions with the Kumaras, the four Kumaras. It describes that these senses, the sense objects, they're all ultimately temporary. So when one tries to find happiness in that which is innately temporary, it ultimately ends up dissatisfied. This is also explained in the Bhagavad Gita. Yehi samsparsa jaboka dukkha yona yaevate advayan panta kauntaya nate suramate buddha. That when the living entity tries to find happiness with the senses coming in contact with the sense objects, what it is it's not the birthplace of happiness, but rather it's the birthplace of suffering. And this birthplace of suffering, Krishna explains as dukkha yonaya. So it's the womb of suffering. So when one sees that ultimately these senses and the sense objects are ultimately temporary, and my sense of identity has simply developed due to my exploitation of these sense objects. For instance, one develops a conception of self, which is known as abhiman, according to the way one tries to exploit this world. So because I'm a businessman, this is my business and I'm a businessman. This is my family, I am a husband. This is my children, I am a mother. So this our sense of I-ness develops according to the way we try to exploit the world, and then according to that sense of I-ness, a sense of my-ness develops. And the sense of I-ness and my-ness, which is separate from being an eternal servant of Krishna, is what's known as ahankara. So when one tries to act on the platform of ahankara, they're engaging in karma, ultimately. So these activities which bind the living entity to the plane of suffering is what's known as karma. And this is ultimately brought about due to the living entity's forgetfulness of being a servant of Krishna. Krishna buliya se jiva nahir bahir mukh ataeva mayatare deha samsara duk. That since time immemorial, the living entity has been forgetful of Krishna. And due to being forgetful of Krishna, the living entity is sent through the cycle of samsara. And the nature of samsara is dukkha, full of suffering. So when one becomes inquisitive, and they begin to be aware that when I try to exploit the sense objects with my senses, it is ultimately bringing suffering, then one moves beyond the plane of exploitation and they move into the plane of renunciation. They feel that this world has simply brought me suffering, and so therefore I renounce it as being false. This is what the Mayavadis do. The materialists, what they do is they accept that everything in this world is ultimately real and eternal. And I can find a sense of happiness and a sense of shelter by making an endeavor to exploit these objects. But the nature is that one just simply experiences suffering. Whereas the impersonalists and Mayavadis, what they do is they say, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mritya, that Brahman is the only truth and that this world is false. So they reject this world being false and they accept that only the Brahman is truth. But the difficulty is that whereas the materialists accept this world as being eternal, and then the impersonalists and Mayavadis accept this world as being false, they both have a misconception. Because it's not that the material world is a false entity. Maya tatami dam sarvam jagat advakya murtina. Ultimately, this material world is also the energy of Krishna. So when one comes into the plane of devotion, then one can actually experience genuine peace because they're no longer existing on a false conception of who they are. This is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Krishna Bhakti Atayeva, Krishna Bhakti Niskam Atayeva Shanta, Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami Sakaleya Shanta. That those who are bhaktas, who are nishkam, they're completely peaceful. and those who are on the platform of rejecting this world as false or accepting everything in this world to be of absolute substance. They're never peaceful because their conception is misplaced. So the Srimad Bhagavatam, this is really the whole gist of the Srimad Bhagavatam from beginning to end. It's encouraging the living entity to go beyond the plane of apparent considerations and enter into the platform of absolute considerations. Rather than just accepting this material body as being the ultimate end-all and be-all, one should endeavor for the nature of that which is of an absolute substance. So this is explained in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's explained, Labbasa durlabha idam bahusam bhavanti. Manusya artadam nityam api hadira. Turnam yatet nanapatet anumritya yavan. Nrishesha yavishayakal savatavatasya. That after coming through many, many species and forms of life, after passing through covered consciousness, developed consciousness, and budding consciousness, one has finally come into the human form of life. And this human form of life is known as Sadurlabha. So it's Durlabha means rare, and Su means extremely rare. And so why is it rare? Because one has attained a human form of life, which is, although it's a temporary, manusyam artadam nityam, although it's a nityam, although it's temporary, it gives one the opportunity to tap into the supreme artham. As it's explained in the Chaitanya Manjusha of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the supreme artham is prema pumarthaman. It gives one the opportunity to experience love for Krishna. In all the other forms and species of life, one is directing their love and one is directing their devotion to things which are ultimately of a temporary substance. Whereas in the human form of life, one can redirect that propensity for love towards that which is of an eternal nature. Prema pumarthamahan. And then it goes on to say, Turnam yatet nanapatet anumritya yavan. Turnam literally means, and how should one go about chasing after this artham? Turnam. One should do it immediately. One shouldn't delay. One should immediately make progress. And this is also explained by Prahlad Maharaj, Komaram apchare pragno dharman bhagavataniha. That from the beginning of life, one should make inquiry into the nature of this Bhagavat Dharma. Because this Bhagavat Dharma is the only thing which can actually bring satisfaction to the heart of the living entity. Because it's completely free from any separate interest. The only interest of the living entity who's situated in Bhagavat Dharma, they're simply interested, how can I have more service? And this disposition to want more service is a natural inclination of the living entity. So when one is simply interested in service directed towards the absolute object of service, then one can feel genuine satisfaction. So one should move towards this immediately. And why should they move it towards immediately? Because nisheshaya vishayakal savatavatasya. Because although this human form of life is rare, it gives one the opportunity to achieve the ultimate treasure in life, Krishna Prema. And it should be done immediately because in other forms of life, this sense gratification is available to practically everyone. So rather than endeavoring for the needs of the material body, one should simply endeavor for the eternal need of the soul. And the eternal need of the soul is that it requires relationship. And unless the soul can find relationship on the platform of eternality, then it will never be satisfied. So the whole process of Krishna consciousness is to train our mind to going from being indifferent towards the process of devotional service to becoming completely intoxicated with love of God. And so the chanting of Hare Krishna, the worshiping of the deity, this is meant to regulate our mind and senses so we can come to a platform where our mind and senses are naturally drawn towards service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And when one comes to this platform of being naturally drawn to service, then one can feel genuine satisfaction. And the only way to be connected with a process that can bring about this natural inclination for service is to come in contact with a genuine sadhu guru. This is explained in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Krishna Bhakti Janma Mula Hoya Sadhu Sangha, Krishna Prema Janme Mula Punamukya Anga. That the root of devotional service is the association of sadhus. And even as one develops Krishna Prema, that association of sadhus still remains the foundation of how one can continue to make progress. So for those who are not in the association of devotees, they should beg for the association of devotees. And for those who are in the association of devotees, then we should pray for the association of the devotees who have one particular quality. And this particular quality is Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavati Mati Kriyatam Yati Katopi Labhyate Tatarloyam Api Mulyam Ekalam Janma Koti Sukritarna Labhyate. We should try to find the association of those devotees who have become spontaneously drawn to the service of Krishna. Their senses and their mind are naturally drawn from Krishna. And then we should hear from those souls, and by hearing from those souls in a submissive attitude, the same way Vidura is approaching Maitreya, then we can also imbibe that same mood of lolium, and that will be our ultimate saving grace. That will lift us up from the mire of conditional life, that will lift us up from the platform of Anishta Sadhana Bhakti, and it will bring us to a steady platform of Krishna consciousness where we can genuinely begin to get a taste for the holy name. We can be genuinely attracted to the form of Krishna, and our mind will be completely absorbed in the name, fame, and pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, we have 6 minutes. So, if there's any discussion, we can expand the vibration. Anyone? Question? Comment? Sachidanoi, Prema Sankirtan. Archita Prabhu. Sure. So my most prominent one actually happened in the last week. I went my last week in India. I decided to go to Govardhan for one parikrama before I had to leave. So I stayed in the Bhaktivedanta ashram that they have on the Parikrama Marg. Any devotees who've been there know it's completely transcendental atmosphere, and it's managed by a very wonderful devotee, His Holiness Asit Krishna Maharaj. And he gave me a room there, and so I was just able to go out on parikrama. Every time I've been on parikrama, I've always been with devotees. So I was a little bit nervous about going out by myself. But the flavor of parikrama on your own was really wonderful, because it really puts you in a sense of dependence on the spiritual master, a sense of dependence on Srila Prabhupada, praying that they'll give you their association when you're out on the marg. So when I got to Radhakund, I went down to Radhakund, I sprinkled some water in my head, and then I went to Shamakund, sprinkled water in my head, and I went back to Radhakund. And then I went around, I went down to Lalitakund, I sprinkled water in my head, and then this Bengali gentleman, whose name was Prabhu Datta Banerjee. He was a police officer with the Calcutta Police Department. And he started striking a conversation with me. Generally in India, when the general public want to strike a conversation with me, they want to know where I'm at, where I'm from, and if they can take a picture with me. So I'm not really so inclined to interact with everyone very liberally. But anyways, he was asking, so I was trying to be nice. And as we were walking, we were going around Radhakund, and then we were making our way back to the Govardhan Marg. Anyone who's been there, they know the path. And so we were walking down that path, and he was telling me about his family, his job, and I was thinking to myself, when's this guy going to wrap it up? So we were walking, and then all of a sudden, this little Vrajbasi boy on his bicycle, he came flying down the middle of the path, and then he did one of those skids. Anyone who grew up in America knows about the skid. You got a bicycle, you go really, really fast, and then you create a little black mark. And then, it's good fun for a little boy. So he comes skidding by. He was going at least 15 or 20 miles per hour. He was going really fast. And if we weren't careful, he would have knocked us over and potentially hurt us. So he came right in between us and then skid. And then, Mr. Banerjee, he immediately, went into his cop swabhav and immediately tried to just start to assess the situation and give the boy a good lesson. So I saw it as an opportunity just to keep walking. So I just continued on. And then this boy, he comes up and follows me. And he comes and asks me, he comes up right next to me and he says, "Can I help you with something?" And I he's a Vrajvasi boy, so I wanted to have some fun and see what I could get him to say. So I asked him, "Where's Krishna?" And he looks at me. He's like as if I'm stupid. And he goes, "Krishna's everywhere. He's in Radhakund, he's in Shambhakund, he's in Vrindavan." And then I asked him, "Well, why can't I see him?" And he goes, "You just chant Hare Krishna and be happy." So I was just appreciating, and anyone who's been to Vrindavan or Mayapur, they know that from time to time Krishna will allow you to have these intimate exchanges with the Vrajvasis. And one of the natures, one of the things that I picked up on from this exchange was that which is apparent isn't always necessarily real. Sometimes, according to our external vision, Krishna will cover the Dham with the Antardana Shakti and make us think that the Vrajvasis are ordinary people, that they're not very wealthy and they're not very educated, and they're chewing tobacco, they're doing so many different things. But like I was saying, that which is apparent isn't always necessarily what's real. Because everyone, as Srila Prabhupada said, the one quality about the residents of the Vrajvasis is somehow they're always chanting the names of Krishna. So I realized that we can't necessarily see who is who in this world, but rather through their words and through their mercy, through their grace and through the mercy of Krishna, it can become revealed to us. And so this was a lesson that I learned in Vrindavan, is that which is apparent isn't always real. And what's real is the words of the sadhus, what's real is the words of the Shastra. And so if we can train our mind and intelligence while we're in the Dham, then this is how we can actually access the essence of it. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Okay. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Dai Gaura Premanande.